Alright, today we are back with a new interview with the director of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Remake Part 3, Naoki Hamaguchi, where he talks a little bit more about the inclusion of Zack in Rebirth, the whole concept of defying fate, and how much can stuff really change, and we also look past Remake Part 3 to see what could be next for Final Fantasy. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you're new here and you'd like to stick around, you can subscribe. It is greatly appreciated. So, let's talk about it. Alright, today's interview comes to us from the folks over at Nintenderos, where they got to sit down with Naoki Hamaguchi to talk shop on the Switch 2 version of Rebirth. And we start off first with a very controversial topic. It's been taking the social media by storm these past couple of weeks for Final Fantasy fans, and that's the whole topic of defying fate. And with a theme like that firmly established in Remake, how much can the story really deviate from the original game? Hamaguchi goes on to say, since we're telling this story as a trilogy, it's essential to keep players engaged until the very end. For that reason, we've structured the narrative so that the central question, whether the protagonist's fate will truly change, remains unresolved until the finale. However, that doesn't mean everything can change. From the beginning, we decided that we couldn't compromise the emotional core of the characters, the reason FF7 has been loved for so many years, or the fundamental themes the story presents to players. There are elements we've changed to create that pulse-pounding sense of unpredictability, and elements that allow those familiar with the original to feel this is truly FF7. If we lean too heavily toward either of these aspects, the game simply wouldn't work. Rebirth isn't a game that blurs that line. It's a game where we deliberately chose to make change and preservation coexist. While introducing changes to shake up expectations, we protect the core that must remain until the very end. We believe this balance is the most important aspect of this trilogy. Now, as I mentioned at the top of this question, this whole idea of will things actually change? Will stuff just stay the same? Is it pointless? If nothing changes, then what was the point of this entire trilogy? It's been very controversial on the old internets these past couple of weeks. I tend to stay away from it myself. There's just so many conflicting emotions and thoughts from people, and personally, just my own thoughts, I'll put this out there. I really love how they've handled the trilogy. I really love a lot of the new stuff that they've included. So for me personally, when it comes to the ending of this trilogy, again, we don't know what it's going to be. I would like for some things to be different and change, because it kind of feels like that's what the story itself is doing. It's setting up a lot of new stuff that could change by the time we get to part 3 and inevitably end the game. We do know that the developers too are working to create an ending that is hopefully more happy, maybe not something that's super ambiguous like the original game was. So while I'd like to see some stuff change, for the most part, I'm just here to see what vision the developers have. Whatever they want to go with and run with, I'm here to check it out. I'll either love it or I won't. But I think for me, regardless of how I feel at the end, it won't change the journey that we took to get here. Remake is something I loved. Rebirth is something I loved. Regardless of how I feel about the game's ending, it's not really going to change that journey that I took. Those incredible moments I had with the characters and the music and the exploration, the combat, all of that will still be there. But whether it's old stuff or new stuff, again, I feel like the core of what the characters are and what the story is still intact. And I've been saying this for years now, but my whole thought process on this trilogy and how they're telling the story is that essentially those big story beats will mostly still stay the same, with the occasional change from the developers with those big story points, adding new wrinkles and flourishes and whatnot. It's just how we get to those points is what's going to be a little bit different, which we've already been experiencing. Aspects of Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus are already all over the place in this story in Remake and Rebirth, and to our surprise, they already did aspects of the Cloud Tifa livestream sequence in Rebirth, but this time it was just Tifa falling into the livestream, being swallowed by the weapon, and guided through some of her early childhood memories, learning the truth of what actually happened the day that bridge collapsed and she got hurt, and how it wasn't Cloud's fault at all. The fact that we have fought every Sephiroth form so far, save for Safer Sephiroth and the very final Sephiroth we see in the void of the OG FF7. The addition of characters like Roche, the fact that we're visiting different locations than we did in the original game in different orders, the inclusion of Zack, which we will talk about in the next section. So I love all of that stuff because there's stuff where I'm like, oh, Leonardo DiCaprio meme. I remember that from the original. And then there's the new stuff that they hit you with where it's like, whoa, what are they doing? Like, where is this story actually going? So it keeps me personally on the edge of my seat. So that balancing act of keeping some stuff the same, changing some stuff, adding new things, I think is probably really difficult, but I think they've been doing a great job and I really appreciate it. And I say all of that to essentially make the point of, I think that all of these changes will eventually add up to mean something, that they won't just be, oh, we just made changes for the fun of it and then we're just gonna go back on all of it in the third game. I think this stuff is here for a reason, and I think narratively it will pay off. I hope. Up next, they ask Hamaguchi, what about Zack Fair? What made you guys give him a more prominent role in the story for Rebirth? He would go on to say, Zack's presence was part of the concept from a fairly early stage. Since the original game, Zack has become an enormously popular character through numerous FF7 spin-off titles. In this remake project, there are aspects where we've made significant changes compared to the original. Instead of conveying these shifts in worldview directly through dialogue or explanations, we've taken the approach of allowing players to intuitively perceive them through the character of Zack. Zack is a character whose mere presence naturally brings to the surface a different perspective on the world. That's precisely why in Rebirth we've incorporated him in the story in a way that maximizes his appeal. And of course, this approach is maintained throughout the entire trilogy. In that regard, we hope you'll continue to follow Zack's role in the story. And I think that was a really brilliant choice. Now, one of my biggest criticisms I had of Rebirth is I felt that Zack was underutilized. I really wanted to see more of him, more of his interactions with the characters, more of the world that he was in. And they only sprinkled just a few doses of Zack throughout that game's story. But I think choosing to use him as a narrative device to kind of explain some of the newer stuff is smart, because that's kind of what Zack's role has always been, at least since the compilation. If you look at Crisis Core, Zack is one of the only grounded, normal characters in that cast. He's surrounded by a bunch of weirdos. Which makes sense. A lot of soldiers have their own eccentricities. Even Zack, has that. He really wants to be a hero, but he's a good dude. He's more grounded than most of the people around him. So when he sees the weird stuff happening, he's kind of like the audience member. Like, what the heck is going on? Like, this guy just ate my hair? Like, are you serious right now? So I really love that use of Zack. He really is kind of like the POV character for a lot of people, because when weird stuff happens, he reacts to it in a way that I think the player would probably react to it as well. He's also incredibly fun in combat, and you only really get to use him for just a little bit. So I'm really hoping they expand the role of Zack in Part 3, and I think they will. I've had this theory that maybe Zack could catch up to our party, and maybe he joins the party for a little bit, because we will lose Cloud for a, sizable chunk of that game's story after the whole Northern Crater incident when he hands over that black materia to Sephiroth, assuming things play out that same way. And maybe to fill the void in terms of combat of not having a Cloud, we get Zack instead for a little bit. So that could be pretty cool if they choose to do that. But I just want more Zack. He's such a great character. I love his reactions to things. I love how hopeful and heroic he is. He's one of those characters that is super inspiring. He kind of does feel like maybe like a generic anime hero trope, but it really works. He's a cool character, and I just want to see more of him. So I'm really curious to see how they use him moving forward in Part 3. That could be pretty big. Up next, they ask Hamaguchi, is there anything from Rebirth that foreshadows something that could happen in the third part of the trilogy, and will that make sense once the entire trilogy is done? And to summarize what Hamaguchi says here, he essentially says that they've taken great care to build Remake and Rebirth step by step, and that he's happy for people that once this trilogy is done to go back and just kind of look at it through a slightly different lens now that they have more information, essentially. Basically adding way more context, which is essentially what Rebirth does with Remake. After playing Rebirth and seeing what's going down in terms of the wonkiness of Sephiroth and Aerith, the changes from the Whispers, it completely recontextualizes Aerith's entire role and how she acts in Remake. Because it's very clear in Remake that she knows a lot. She might know some things that the others aren't privy to. And I think like one of the greatest moments is, and I don't know if this is ever confirmed, but it's basically when the plate's about to fall. I think truly in her heart, deep down, Aerith knows this plate is falling. But what does she do? She tries her best to reassure Tifa that maybe they can change some things. Maybe they can save people. Maybe they can stop it, even though she knows in her heart that's not what's going to happen. And that's not really context you get until Rebirth, when Aerith acknowledges, like, yeah, I used to know a lot more stuff. These memories are essentially taken from me, which is why her white materia is all empty. There's nothing left in there. No knowledge, no memories, no experiences, nothing. The Whispers took it. So I'm excited to play part 3 and finish it, and then go back and look at the story of Remake and Rebirth and go, oh, this adds way more context to this specific moment or to this character and why things played out the way that they did. And I think once the trilogy is said and done, I think people might look at Rebirth a little differently, maybe a little less harsh when it comes to the game's ending, because again, it's only halfway through the story. But I think maybe by the time everything is said and done, it will completely recontextualize what we experienced at the end of the game. And maybe there will be people who are like, you know, I didn't like Rebirth's ending, but now that I know what's going on with part 3, I appreciate it more. Hopefully. Up next, they ask Hamaguchi about another slightly controversial thing, and that is fan theories. How many of those theories floating around surprised Hamaguchi, and were there any that came pretty close to their original intention with the story and the characters? Hamaguchi goes on to say, what surprised me was not whether a particular theory was correct, but how seriously the fans were delving into and debating the premises and underlying meanings of the story, much more than I had anticipated. However, I have no intention of evaluating those interpretations by saying, that's correct, or that's close to what was intended. The moment we start doing that, the story ceases to be an experience to be received and becomes a search for the right answer. In this remake project, while we clearly presented the information that needed to be conveyed through a modern narrative, we deliberately left room for players to connect the dots and continue thinking for themselves. The decision to present this as a trilogy, with each installment released separately, is based on the idea that the story isn't meant to be concluded in a single experience, but rather for players to engage with, including in the time leading up to the release of the next installment. The fact that this has generated so much discussion among fans is, to me, a clear sign that this design is working as we intended. Smart choice here by Hamaguchi. The one thing you don't want to do as a creative is kind of go out there and confirm whether someone is right or wrong or super close with fan theories. Because like he says, that changes the story at that point. It's not something that is an experience to be received. It just becomes who's right, who's wrong, and that's not really all that fun. And we've spoken on this, at length in videos, but the structure of it being a trilogy, obviously you want a cliffhanger type moment that lasts with people, that makes people question what the heck just happened, what are they going to do next? Like most of my channel and every other content creator's channel that talks about Final Fantasy has at some point theory crafted or talked about what happened at the end of Rebirth, where things are leading. You've got some really incredible content out there from people like Subtext and John Q Gamer who really break down the lore of these games and kind of, theorize what could happen in the next game. And for me personally, I don't really consider myself a theory crafter. I leave that to the smart people. I essentially just say shit. I love these characters. I love the story. I think it's intriguing. So my brain just naturally starts to connect dots or wonder what could happen. So I just say those things. But the one thing I want to make clear, and I've said this before, I love Final Fantasy VII. It's a franchise that's been with me since I was a kid, but I would not and will not ever consider myself an authority on FF7. There are people out there that know way more about the world and the spin-offs, the supplemental material than I do. I'm just a fan who really loves it and likes to talk about things. So when I theorize some stuff or throw out suggestions, I don't do it to go, oh, I'm right, that person's wrong, and I don't have the hope of I want to be right. I don't want to be right. I want to be completely surprised by what happens in part 3 and thrown a curveball of I didn't see that coming. And there are some people out there that, they do want that. They want to come up with thoughts and theories that are correct. And if they're not, they might end up being disappointed. But for me, the developers clearly have a vision here. I'm just on this ride enjoying the journey. I want to see this vision through to the end and what they've got cooking up. So while all of this stuff is incredibly fun to talk about, I never want to take the approach of I need to be right or I'm probably right. It's just so much fun to discuss this stuff in videos and with other people and see what people are saying online. And again, to kind of jump back to the whole Defying Fate thing, I know there are some people who are like, the third part needs to be different. The ending has to change. Otherwise, everything leading up to this point was pointless. Now, again, I'll reiterate what I said. I do hope things are different. I do hope that the ending is different from the original FF7, and I truly do think it will be, because again, they've been finding ways to incorporate Advent Children and the rest of the compilation organically into this world to where it all makes sense. And it really feels like through characters like Cloud and Aerith, they want to find a way to avoid that scenario where things go down the Advent Children path. Because it's like, well, if we end part 3 and then we go into Advent Children, I love Advent Children. It's got a lot of issues, but I really like it, and playing through that would be cool. But the way I've always kind of viewed it, and I hope this doesn't upset people, because again, I love Advent Children, but Advent Children, Dirge, when you really think about it, those are technically the bad endings to this story. Because what happens in Advent Children? Geostigma's a thing. It's ravaging the planet. People are getting sick and dying. There's no cure. Cloud is not doing well. And Sephiroth comes back, and he has to be beaten again. In Dirge, Hojo had a secret plan that rears its ugly head with Deep Ground, and they're trying to awaken the final weapon in Omega and end the planet. So that's another crisis those characters have to go through. And I think for me and a lot of other people, we just want the ending of part 3 to be a finite conclusion that wraps up as many of those story threads as they can, and for it to be an ending where it's like, oh, the characters just get to be happy. They don't got to worry about Sephiroth coming back. Sephiroth Genova has been rid of the planet, and there's no need to go down the path of an Advent Children or a Dirge. So I talked so much I forgot what the whole point of this was. But essentially what I'm saying is that while I would like things to change, regardless of what happens, I just want to see what the vision is at the end. And again, based on what the devs have been doing so far, it really feels like that ending will be different. I don't think we'll be left with that ambiguous ending like we had from the OG FF7. Sorry for rambling. There's just so much going on, and I haven't made like one of these types of videos in a while. Apologies. Up next, they decide to ask Hamaguchi about who his favorite character in FF7 is, and if he had to choose Tifa or Aerith. Oh God, I hope this doesn't bring in scary people into the comments. But he goes on to say, I get asked this question often, but I've personally never made comments like, this is my favorite character. Every character has many fans, and I believe any unintentional bias in my words would be undesirable for both the fans and the work. What I can honestly say is that, after more than 10 years involved in this project, there are times when I wonder if I've spent more time thinking about the characters and interacting with them than with my own family. In that sense, for me, the characters aren't something I can separate individually. More than independent individuals, they are valuable presences, close to a family, and the idea of classifying them doesn't even occur to me. Same feelings here, Hamaguchi. I know that there's a section of the shipping community that is very scary. I have seen them in my comments. It's just, these characters are all wonderful. I love all of them. Tifa is like one of my favorite characters of all time, but I freaking love Aerith. I love Cloud. I love Barrett. I love everyone in this cast for different reasons, because they all are such well-written characters, and in terms of the remake trilogy, voiced beautifully, and they're all valuable. You don't save the day without Tifa and Aerith, or Barrett and Red. You need the entire team there. Everyone is a valuable presence in this story and is required to be there. But like he says, these are characters that feel like a family. I can't really think about one without the other, so I tend to think about the entire cast, and I think his approach here is the right one, even though there will be people that, misconstrue it and take it out of context. There's really no winning when it comes to that stuff, unfortunately. And to end the interview, they ask Hamaguchi, what's next? What game would you like to create? Would you prefer to stay with Final Fantasy or try something completely new? He would say, we are constantly updating our vision on what kind of experiences we can offer next. As the 7 Remake project nears completion, I want to meet the expectations of fans who desire even more depth in this world and its characters. At the same time, I am very aware of the need to consider how we can expand the potential of the Final Fantasy franchise as a whole for the next generation. On the other hand, as the creator of these works, if there is demand for new and unique experiences that differ from what we have done so far, I am also eager to face those challenges. While I may not be able to do everything at once, I'm not only a game director, but also head of one of the studios within Square Enix. Looking ahead, the number of projects I oversee as head of studio will likely increase. Regardless of the form they take, I will continue to deliver engaging experiences to the game fans who have high expectations of both me, Naoki Hamaguchi, and the work of my studio. That commitment will not change. And that's really the big question, is what is next? Hamaguchi has talked about potentially doing DLC for Remake Part 3 if there's enough fan demand. Essentially, if enough people go out and buy the game and play it, they would consider doing DLC. Again, I don't know what the DLC would be in terms of story. It's, again, very hard to surpass Sephiroth and Jenova as villains unless you try to adapt Deep Ground, but there are ways to do Deep Ground story within Remake Part 3 that wrap up even that, again, to prevent going down like the Advent Children and Dirge timeline of things. But I wouldn't be shocked if they approach Hamaguchi and CS1 and say, hey, would you guys like to do Final Fantasy 18? Because I'm pretty sure 17 is already in development. Again, Square Enix usually has the next Final Fantasy start development when the current one is getting close to release. So theoretically, that's something that maybe has been, in development for a few years now, unless some of the restructuring, kind of changed the timeline of things. But I would assume he and CS1, if they don't create something new, they would do the next mainline Final Fantasy, which would be in 18. And while that would be a little dicier because it's a completely new story, a new world, new characters, you don't have the iconography of Final Fantasy VII to rely on, it is very curious for me to see what they would do. What kind of story would they want to tell? Would it be darker or lighter? Would it be like a balanced tone like 7 currently does with the Remake trilogy and the OG game? What would combat be like? Because Hamaguchi has said in the past they don't want to use the exact same combat system from previous games in a new game, but they would take elements of it that worked and try to work it into something different. But that's really the big question, is how do you expand Final Fantasy even further? How do you get more of the younger people involved? How do you find that balance for people in terms of combat? Again, I love the hybrid combat system, but I also really love turn-based too. But one thing I know for sure, Hamaguchi and the team at CS1, they're very talented developers. They know what they're doing. They take fan feedback into consideration when it comes to the gameplay aspects of stuff. And I feel whatever they would do next will probably end up being pretty good. He's got a real good eye for this stuff. He's got his finger on the pulse, much like Yoshi P and a lot of other Japanese developers, especially, people at Capcom that kind of know what audiences are kind of leaning towards. But I'd be very curious to see what they do next. New IP or FF18. Time will only tell. With that being said, that is the video. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys thought of what we covered in today's video. And my question for you guys, what do you think Zack's gonna do in Part 3? How big do you think his role is gonna be? Do you think he'll join the party as maybe like a sub-in for Cloud? Do you think he's maybe off doing his own thing with his own team? Let me know in the comments down below. I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.